I was 13 the summer the rivers died, and I have lived a long life since, but I have never been able to forget the sound of a man telling my mother she could shoot him after she'd had her drink. That was the summer of 1893, in the dry country of the New Mexico Territory, where the picos had shrunk to a brown thread you could step across without wetting your boots. The land had cracked open like old bread. Cattle stood in the heat with their heads down and gave up one at a time, and the buzzards grew so fat and lazy they hardly bothered to climb when you walked past. We had been walking for 9 days by then. My mother carried a wound in her hip that she would not look at, and she carried Pearl, who was 4 and weighed almost nothing, and the rest of us carried each other. We found the well by following the green. In that country, green meant water, and water meant we might live one more day. It sat at the bottom of a shallow draw on a hardscrabble spread, a stone ring with a leather bucket and a windmill that turned slow against a white sky. My mother got us to it and let us drink, 2 swallows each and no more, and then she sat down with her back against the stone and put our father's old scattergun across her knees and told us to get behind her. She had learned by then that anything good in the world had a man behind it who would want it back. He came at noon, riding a sorrel mare so dust-colored she looked carved out of the ground. He was older than my mother, gray coming into a beard he hadn't troubled to trim, with a face the sun had worked on for 40 years. He pulled up 20 feet off and looked at us a long while, at the wound my mother could no longer hide, at the 7 of us packed behind her like quail. "That's my well," he said. "Then it's the first thing I've stolen," my mother said. Her voice shook, but the barrel of that scattergun did not much. "And I'll go on stealing it. Come closer and find out what it costs you." He had a rifle in a scabbard under his knee. I saw him look at it. I have thought about that moment 10,000 times in the years since, because I have come to understand that everything we became turned on what a stranger decided to do with his hands in the next 5 seconds. What he did was get down off his horse slow, with his palms showing. He lifted the rifle out by 2 fingers like it was something dead, and he laid it down in the dirt, and he stepped away from it. "Water's free," he said. "Always has been. There's no man within 40 miles charges money for water, and I'm not going to be the first." He took off his hat and wiped his face with it. "Drink all you want. Fill anything that'll hold it. And when you're done, ma'am, if you've still got a mind to shoot me, I'll be standing right here. But I'd take it as a kindness if you'd water the young ones first." My mother did not lower the gun. I want to be plain about that, because people who tell this story later made her out softer than she was, and she was not soft. She was a woman who had been lied to by every gentle voice she'd ever trusted, and she sat there in the dirt deciding whether this was one more. "What's your name?" she said. It was not a question. "Amos Carver," he said. "This is my land. I've got no wife and no children and nobody to feed but a half-blind dog who's no help at all, and I've got a roof and a fire and more beans than one man can eat in the time God's likely to give me." He looked at us again. "I don't know what's behind you, but I know what's in front of me, and what's in front of me is children dying of thirst on my land, and I will not have that on my account." Pearl, who was 4, who understood nothing of guns or men or any of it, walked out from behind my mother before any of us could grab her. She went up to Amos Carver, and she put a small gray pebble into his open palm and closed his fingers over it, and she said, very seriously, "For the water." Then she stuck out her hand to be shaken, the way she'd seen men do at the camp. Amos Carver looked down at that pebble like it was a gold piece. He shook her hand. "Sold," he said, "and that was the first thing my family ever bought." His house was a low thing of adobe and timber set into the hill so the earth would keep it cool, and he carried my mother into it himself, because by the time we got there she had stopped pretending she could walk. I have wondered since whether he knew, carrying her, that he had just changed the whole direction of his life. I don't think he did. I think he was only doing the next needful thing, which I would learn was the whole of how that man lived. He laid her on his own bed and sent Silas, who was 11 and steady, to build up the fire, and he got the rest of us bowls of beans and cornbread and stood over us while we ate too fast and were sick and ate again. Then he turned to the wound in my mother's hip, and his face changed, and he sent the little ones out. Buckshot, he said, he'd seen it before. Been in there too long, it's gone bad on her. He looked at me because I was the eldest and he had already worked out that I was the one who didn't flinch. What's your name? Josie. Josie, I need you to hold her down and not let go, no matter what she does or what she says to you. Can you do that? I could. I had held my mother down through worse. He poured whiskey over a knife and over his hands, and he set a strip of leather between her teeth, and he went into her with the blade by the light of a single lamp, while the windmill creaked outside and Pearl cried in the next room and would not be hushed. My mother arched off that bed like something trying to leave its own body. I lay across her shoulders and put my mouth against her ear and told her the same thing over and over, that it was almost done, that she was almost through, and I felt the moment the lead came loose because she went slack all at once and the leather fell out of her mouth. He cleaned it and packed it and bound it, and then he sat back on the floor with his bloody hands hanging between his knees and looked older than he had at the well. She'll live or she won't, he said. The next 2 days will say which. There's nothing more I can do but keep her cool and keep her clean and wait. We waited. The fever came up in her that night like the heat coming off the land, and she talked to people who weren't there, to our father, to a man named Royce Tillman, whose name made all of us go still when she said it. On the second night I sat with Amos by the fire while the little ones slept in a heap like puppies, and he asked me, careful, where we had come from, and I told him. I told him about the camp, about Royce Tillman, who supplied men and boys and sometimes girls to the mines and the rail crews and the big outfits that needed cheap backs and didn't ask how the backs got cheap. I told him my mother had cooked and washed there after our father died of the cough, and how she had started gathering the ones nobody counted, Toby, whose folks had both gone to fever, the twins' way of it, Asa, found in a wash with no name to give, Pearl, who Tillman's men had brought in off a wagon and could not say where she belonged. I told him how Tillman kept papers on all of us. Indenture papers, he called them. Said our parents had signed us over, or that the territory had, or that it didn't matter who had because the paper said what it said and the law backed the paper. He was going to sell us to the copper mine at Cobber Hollow, I said. All 7, he'd already taken the money. My mother heard him say it. So she took us and ran, and one of his men put buckshot in her going over the fence, and we've been walking ever since. I looked at the fire. He'll come for us. He doesn't lose things. He told her once that a thing with his paper on it was his forever, and he meant it. Amos Carver was quiet a long time. Papers, he said at last, the way a man says a word in a language he doesn't speak. I never had much use for papers. He got up and put another log on the fire we didn't need in that heat, only to be doing something. How old's the littlest, Pearl? 4 about. And he's got a paper says a 4-year-old signed her life over to a copper mine. He's got a paper says whatever he wants it to say. Amos nodded slow, and I did not understand then what I understood much later, that he was already turning something over, some first edge of the thing that would save us, and that it was not a gun he was thinking of. In the morning, my mother's fever broke. She woke with her eyes clear for the first time in days and found 7 children alive around her and a strange man asleep sitting up in a chair. And she started to cry without any sound at all, which was how she always cried, and Pearl climbed up on the bed and pressed a pebble into her hand. I bought you a drink, Pearl told her. From the man, it's all paid for. The nearest town was a half-day's ride, a single dusty street the territory called Sabina, and the woman who ran it, more or less, was Cora Vance. She kept the store, and she'd buried 2 husbands, and she had a tongue that could take the hide off a mule at 30 paces. When Amos brought us in to buy cloth and salt and a tincture for my mother's wound, Cora Vance came out from behind her counter and looked at the 7 of us, and then at Amos, and said the thing the whole street was thinking. Amos Carver, have you lost what little mind you started with? A woman and a litter of children living out at your place, and not a one of them yours. The talk'll strip you bare. Let it, Amos said. They'll say things. People been saying things about me since Sarah died. Hasn't fed me yet the talk, hasn't watered my sheep. He set his money on the counter. These children were dying, Cora. I found them dying. You want me to have ridden on? Cora Vance looked at us a while longer, and then she looked at Pearl, who had come up to the counter and was solemnly arranging 3 pebbles on it in a row, the way she'd seen men lay out coins. What's that one doing? She means to buy something, I said. She pays for everything. It's how she keeps herself since the camp. She doesn't take things, she buys them. Cora Vance came around the counter and crouched down, joints cracking, and looked at the 3 small stones. And what'll these buy me, child? Pearl considered it with great care. A peppermint, she decided. And Cora Vance, who had taken the hide off grown men for less, went and got a peppermint stick from the jar and laid it in Pearl's hand and took up the 3 pebbles and put them in her apron pocket like they were worth keeping. And I saw the whole hard front of her go to pieces behind her eyes, and after that there was nothing Cora Vance would not have done for us. She was the first the town gave us, and she gave herself entire. It was Cora who told us the rest. That Royce Tillman had been seen in the territory, that he had been asking after a woman and 7 children, offering money, showing papers, that the word was spreading the way Tillman wanted it to spread, that there was a thief woman who had stolen bonded children off a lawful concern and a fool rancher harboring her. We were standing on the boards outside the store taking that in when a man came up the street on a good horse with a leather case across his saddle, and he tipped his hat to my mother like she was somebody, and he introduced himself as Mr. Hollis Crane, agent of the Territorial Land and Claims Office, and he said he had been hearing the most troubling things, and that he had come a long way to set them right. He was the smoothest man I ever met. I'll say that for him across all these years. He had soft hands and a soft voice, and he listened to my mother tell her story with his head tilted and his eyes wet at the right moments. And when she was done, he shook his head slow and said it was a wickedness, that men like Tillman were a stain on the territory, and that the law, the real law, was on our side if only somebody who knew the law would stand up and use it for us. Indenture papers on orphan children, he said, are very often improper, frequently fraudulent. The territory takes a dim view. He patted the leather case. But you must move first, Mr. Carver. You must establish lawful guardianship and put it on record before Tillman files anything of his own. Possession in these matters is 9 parts paper. Let me file protective papers for you today before he gets ahead of us. Sign here, and the children come under your guardianship under territorial seal, and Tillman's claims become so much waste. Amos Carver could read, but he was no man for the language of law, and he looked at the dense pages Crane laid out, and then he looked at my mother, and my mother looked at Hollis Crane's wet, kind eyes, and we were so tired, and we wanted so badly for there to be one gentle voice in the world that told the truth. Amos signed. He signed where the soft-handed man pointed, and Hollis Crane blotted the ink and gathered the pages back into his case, and told us we had done the wise thing, the safe thing, and rode off in the direction of the county seat looking very pleased. He had reason to be. He had just signed all 7 of us over to Royce Tillman, and Amos Carver had held the pen. Tillman came 4 days later, and he did not come at night, and he did not come hiding. He came up the draw past the well in the full white blast of noon with 6 men behind him, and a wagon behind them, the kind of wagon with bars, and he sat his horse in front of Amos Carver's house like a man come to collect a debt that bored him. I knew him the moment I saw him, though I had spent the last weeks trying to forget his face. He was not a large man. That is the thing people never believe. He was narrow and neat, with a clean shave and all that dust and a watch chain across his vest, and he had the patient, tidy manner of a man who has never once in his life been told no and made it stick. He looked at the 7 of us gathered on the porch behind my mother, and he smiled like a man counting money he'd already spent. "Ruth," he said, "you've cost me considerable. Buckshot in you and you still walked 60 miles. I'd hire you if I didn't have to hang you." He turned the smile on Amos. "You'd be Carver. You've been minding my property. I'm obliged. I'll take it off your hands now." "They're not property," Amos said. He had his rifle, but he held it low, and I understood even then that he knew a gun was no answer to 7 armed men, that if it came to shooting we would all die on that porch in the heat. "They're under my guardianship, territorial seal, filed 3 days back. You've got no claim here that the law here." And Royce Tillman laughed. It was a small, delighted sound, and it was the worst thing I had heard yet, worse than the buckshot, worse than the fever, because it was the laugh of a man who has already won and is only now getting to enjoy it. "Filed," he said. "By whom, I wonder? By a soft little fellow with a leather case, tilted his head when she cried." He clicked his tongue. "Hollies, come up here and show the man your good work." And Hollies Crane rode up out of the line of Tillman's men, where he had been the whole time, where I had not let myself see him, and he no longer had wet, kind eyes. He took the pages from his case, the very pages Amos had signed, and he held them up so we could all see the seal. "Guardianship and transfer of indenture," Crane read out, pleasant as ever, from the undersigned to Mr. Royce Tillman of the Cobber Hollow concern. "Signed, Amos Carver." He smiled at Amos. "You did move first, I'll give you that. You moved first and you handed them right to him, and you did it in your own hand under territorial seal, and there's not a court in this territory will unwind a man's own signature." He folded the pages back into the case. "I told you possession was paper. I never said whose." I watched it go out of Amos Carver's face, the thing he had been carrying since the well, the certainty that doing the next needful thing was enough. He had trusted a gentle voice, the way we all had, the way my mother had sworn she never would again, and it had cost us everything, and it had cost it lawfully with a seal, so that the very law he'd reached for now reached back and closed its hand around all 7 of us. "Load them up," Tillman said to his men, bored again. "We've a long ride to the railhead and the mine wants them by the new moon." My mother stepped down off the porch then, between Tillman's men and her children, the way she had stepped between us and the world 100 times, and I thought, here is where they shoot her, and I could not breathe. But Amos Carver put his hand on her shoulder and drew her back gentle, and he stepped down in her place, and he did a thing I did not understand at all. He laughed. It was not a good laugh, not like Tillman's. It was a low, tired, dangerous sound, and it made even Tillman's smile flicker. "You're proud of that paper," Amos said. "You ought to be. It's a fine piece of work. It's so fine it's got a little 4-year-old child's mark on the indenture line, hasn't it, Crane? Pearl's mark. You had her make it that day in town, I'll bet, when she was laying out her pebbles, a cross with your hand over hers." He nodded slow. "And it's got the marks of 7 children's parents giving them over, every one. Same paper, you said, all proper." He looked at Tillman. "You want to take this to a judge, Tillman. You want to wave that seal at a circuit judge real bad. So do I, so do I." Tillman's smile was gone now. He was looking at Amos Carver the way a tidy man looks at a sum that has stopped adding up. "Take them today," Amos said, "and you've got 7 children and no court, and you'll be looking over your shoulder the rest of your life for the day somebody asks where they went. Or you let the law you love so much have its say, in front of a judge on the record, and we'll all find out together exactly what your fine paper is worth." He spread his hands. "I'm only a fool rancher, but even a fool knows you don't bring a forged paper to a judge unless you've got no idea it's forged. So which is it, Mr. Tillman, did you know?" And there it was. I saw it cross Royce Tillman's narrow face, the first doubt I ever saw on it, because Hollies Crane had handled the forging. Crane had filled in the marks and the dates and the dead parents' names, and Tillman had paid for it and never read it close, the way rich men never read the work they pay other men to do. Tillman did not actually know what was on the paper he was so proud of. And now, in the white noon heat in front of his own hired men, he could not be sure. He should have taken us anyway. He had the guns. But he was a man who had won everything his whole life by making the law do his stealing for him, and Amos had found the one fear under all his certainty, that the law was a tool that could be turned, and that he had just been told in front of witnesses that it might turn in his hand. "The county seat," Tillman said at last, soft. 3 days. We'll let the judge bless it since the rancher's so eager to be blessed." He gathered his reins. "Enjoy your 3 days, Ruth, count them." They rode off down the draw, and Amos Carver sat down on the porch step very suddenly, like his legs had quit, and Pearl came and put a pebble in his hand without a word, and he closed his fingers over it and held on like it was the only solid thing left in the world. The circuit court sat in a town 2 days' ride south, in a courthouse of raw new brick that smelled of mortar and pine. The judge was a big slow man named Harlan Pike, who had ridden the territory 30 years and had, Cora Vance told us on the way, exactly one thing he could not abide, which was being made a fool of with paper. "He'll forgive a man near anything done with his fists," she said. "It's the men with clean hands he watches." We did not come to that courtroom with guns. That is the part I want told right, because the men who came after told it with gunfights, and there was none. We came with Cora Vance, who knew everyone, and a satchel of the things Amos and my mother had spent 3 days and nights gathering by lamplight, riding to 2 settlements and a mission to dig them out, and we came with the truth, laid out in a row like Pearl laying out her pebbles, each small thing worth nothing alone and everything together. Tillman's lawyer presented the papers first, grand and sure, the seal, the signatures, the transfer to the Cobber Hollow concern, all proper, all lawful. He made my mother out a thief and Amos a dupe, and asked the court to confirm the indentures so his client could remove his lawful property and be done. Then Amos Carver stood up, in the suit Cora had pressed for him, turning his hat in his hands, and he was no lawyer and he did not pretend to be. "I can't argue law, Your Honor," he said. "I'll waste your time if I try, so I'll just show you the paper the same as them, only I'll show you what's written on it." He laid the indentures out where Pike could see. "This here's the line for the child Pearl Donnelly, age 4. There's a mark on it, a cross. Folks'll tell you a 4-year-old made it." He set down beside it a worn little Bible from the mission. "And this is the mission register from the Cobber Hollow camp. Father Ortiz keeps it. Pearl came to that camp off a wagon in March, no name, and the priest wrote it down the day she came, because that's his work." He opened the register to the page. "March, and the indentures dated February. Your Honor, that paper's got a 4-year-old child signing herself to a copper mine a month before anybody in the territory had ever laid eyes on her." The room was very quiet. "And this," Amos said, and laid down a third thing, a folded letter, "is from the county at Las Vegas, in answer to a question Mrs. Vance here wired them. It says the man named on 3 of these indentures as the consenting father, one Eustace Pierre Ya au Air. It says he died of the cough in the winter of '91. 2 years dead, Your Honor, and signing papers in '93. He straightened up. "I can't argue law. But I know a dead man can't sign, and a baby can't bond herself, and I figure you know it too." Judge Harlan Pike turned the pages over with 2 thick fingers, slow, and the longer he looked the redder his neck got, and Tillman's lawyer began to talk faster, about clerical error, about how the substance of the matter was the children's welfare, and not these small discrepancies. And Pike held up one hand without looking at him, and the lawyer stopped. "Who filed these papers with the territory?" Pike said. There was a silence, and then my mother stood and she said in the clear, hard voice I'd heard her use at the well, "Mr. Hollis Crane filed them, Your Honor, agent of your own claims office. He filled them in himself. I watched his hand, and the very same papers he forged for Mr. Tillman he filed under territorial seal, which means his office has a copy in his own hand of every false thing on them." She looked at Crane, who had gone the color of the new mortar. "You can't forge a paper and file it official both, Mr. Crane. The one proves the other. You signed your own name to your own lie and stamped it for the territory to keep. I have thought in all the years since that this was the cleverest thing my mother ever did, and she did it standing in a borrowed dress with buckshot scars in her hip. She did not need to prove Tillman a liar. She only needed the law's own files, and Crane had put them there himself, so eager to be official that he'd left the proof of his forgery sitting in a government drawer. Judge Harlan Pike sent a writer to the claims office that hour. The copy came back the next morning, and it matched every false mark, and Pike held the two papers up side by side in front of the whole courtroom. And then he did the thing he could not abide doing being done to others. He made fools, in public, of two men with clean hands. He voided every indenture as fraud upon the court. He ordered Royce Tillman held for forgery and the buying and selling of children, which the territory, it turned out, did take a very dim view of indeed once it was written down in front of a judge and could not be made to disappear. He ordered Hollis Crane held alongside him, agent of the territory turned against it. And he granted lawful guardianship of all 7 of us to Amos Carver and Ruth Donnelly, jointly, under a seal that this time meant what it said. When it was done, in the noise of it, Pearl walked up to the bench, because she did not know you were not allowed, and she reached up as high as she could and set a single gray pebble on the edge of the judge's great desk. Harlan Pike looked down at it over the rail. "And what's this for, child?" "For the help," Pearl said. "It's all paid." And that big slow man who could not abide being made a fool picked up the pebble and turned it over and put it in his vest pocket, against his watch chain, and said, gruff, that he had never in 30 years been paid so fair. The rain came in August, the way it does in that country, all at once and like the sky meant it. We stood out in it, all of us, my mother with her face turned up and her eyes shut, and the cracked land drank and drank, and the draw ran brown, and the old well filled to its stone lip, and ran over for the first time in 2 years. Amos Carver stood with the rain running off his hat and looked at his land coming back to life, and at the children standing in it, and I saw him understand, finally, what he had spent his life doing the next needful thing toward without ever once nomming it. He and my mother married that fall, under no particular ceremony, with Cora Vance for a witness and Father Ortiz come up from the mission, and the 7 of us in a row in clothes that almost fit. There was no great speech. Amos was not a man for them. He took my mother's hand and said he'd buried one wife and grieved her honest and never thought to be glad again, and that he'd been wrong, and that he was a man who liked being wrong about that better than anything he'd ever been right about. And my mother, who had been lied to by every gentle voice she ever trusted, looked at this rough one and believed it. We grew up on that land. Silas took the ranch in the end and made it pay. Nora married the doctor's son in Sabina, and Toby went for the railroad, lawful and paid, and laughed every payday that the same rails Tillman would have sold him to. He now got wages from. The twins stayed close. Asa, who had no name when we found him, gave himself hours and carried it well. And Pearl, who paid for everything. Pearl grew up to keep books for half the territory, the most honest accounts in 4 counties, a woman who all her life could not abide a thing taken that wasn't squared. Royce Tillman died in the territorial prison, and Hollis Crane went north and was not heard of, and I find I have no more to say about either of them, which I think is the truest justice there is, that they spent everything they had to own us, and ended up owning nothing, and that we forgot them while we were busy living. Amos Carver kept Pearl's first pebble, the one she paid him for the water at the well, on the mantel in a small clay jar, and over the years she added to it every pebble she ever paid out, Cora's peppermint and the judge's help and 100 small bought kindnesses, until the jar was full of gray stones that were worth nothing and everything, the way the truth had been worth nothing and everything, laid out in a row. I am an old woman now, and I have been asked many times why a stranger with one well and a half-blind dog took in a wounded woman and 7 hungry children he had every right to ride past, and turned his whole life over for people who could never pay him a cent. And I have come to believe the answer is the thing he never said and lived every day instead. He understood something most men spend their lives getting backward. He understood that a man is not measured by what he keeps, or what he's owed, or what his papers say is his. A man is measured by what he is willing to lose for someone who can never, ever pay him back. That is the whole of it. That is what I learned at the well the summer the rivers died, watching a stranger lay his rifle in the dirt and tell my mother the water was free. Everything good in the world does have a man behind it. My mother was right about that. She was only wrong about what he wants. Some of them, the rare and saving few, want nothing at all. They just do the next needful thing and call it ordinary, and never once know they have made the whole world over for a fistful of worthless stones.